Yeah. So good evening, everybody. It's wonderful to have you join us again for one of our General Husbandry 2026 sessions. This evening, I'm really delighted to introduce to you Christine Coulsting, who is a Hampshire beekeeper, and I should very importantly is a master beekeeper as well, and talks on a number of subjects. I think Christine, one of your claims to fame is you helped us pull together the special edition on
Yes,
pollen
that's right.
for
Yes.
the BBKA,
Yeah.
which I highly recommend. It's an excellent publication. This evening, Christine's going to be talking to us about natural histories or aspects of natural histories and behaviour that are relevant to the general husbandry syllabus. So as normal, if you can just make sure your mics are on mute. If you've got questions, either pop them in the chat or we'll take them at the end. And so with that, I think over to you, Christine. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Right. Okay. Okay. So I have tried to cover aspects of behaviour through the general husbandry syllabus. This we do cover races of the honeybee. And this perhaps is going off, but I've included the slide because actually I find it interesting. So Apis florea. So some of the Apis mellifera is our honeybee here. And Apis mellifera and Apis cerana are actually quite recent sort of honeybees, whereas a lot of the other ones, so Apis florea, the dwarf honeybees and the giant honeybees, really are much originated so much further back, so 25 million years ago. Apis florea, I had to do a talk on that at one point, and I found it interesting because they're quite different to the Apis, the cerana and mellifera, because they have a single comb and they build it onto a branch, and it's actually T-shape. So the top section of the T is where the honey is, and they do the waggle dance on the horizontal surface, and then down the sides of the brood nest is underneath the honey, and they form this. It almost forms like an umbrella, and they cover the brood. So that's interesting from that point of view. The Apis laboriosa, the Himalayan giant honeybee, is the one you see where they're up in sort of under the rock, the overhangs, etc., and the men climb up the rope ladders to go and harvest the honey. And those are all single combs, whereas Apis cerana and Apis mellifera are the multi-comb, and Apis mellifera are honeybees here. So various different subspecies. So Apis mellifera is our own honeybee. And here's some of the characteristics. Compared to Carnica, Ligustica, Caucasia. So basically the Carna from Southeast Europe. A lot of the differences here are the length of the tongue, etc., and how quickly they build up in spring. Ligustica, although they're very gentle, and Ligustica are actually quite popular, sort of to bring across here. They're very gentle, and they can produce huge honey stores, but they overwinter with large colonies, and so that can be a problem. They need lots of stores over winter. Carnica overwinters well on fewer stores, and they're gentle and they build up quickly in spring, and that seems to work much better for us. Okay, so just a few basic reminders, really. The colony who's who, so we've obviously got workers, queen, and drones. So you will need to remember sort of their basic roles within the colony. So we'll go through the workers' age-related behaviour shortly. But the queen mates, and all she does in the hive really is lay eggs. But she's important because she contributes to the character of the colony and also the cohesion. And drones, of course, mate with the queen, and they're basically, well, I say flying sperm. Sorry, it was a slide from a beginner's course. So remember, this is something which at the stage of general husbandry, you will need to know off by heart. So do learn the timings. So worker 3, 6, 12, 21, queen 16 days in total, and drone 24 days, of course, and their lifespan. So workers will live for 6 weeks during summer, and of course so much longer over the winter. Queen can be expected to live up to 5 years, but I think in reality 2, 3 is going fairly well. And drones 2 to 3 months, and I doubt there is many of those around now. So the development of the honeybee is, the metamorphosis is in 4 parts. So it starts off as an egg, and the egg is laid, and basically inside the egg, a very simple structure is developed for the larva. And it gives you the foundations for the adult bee, their buds for wings, legs, etc. And the larva needs a very simple system. So it will have a simple alimentary system, and also respiratory system, which is different from the adult bee, as a photograph which will demonstrate that later. During the larval period, the larvae are fed sort of big quantities. They take on lots of food. This is really a big period where they grow, and they also take on the nutrients, and the nutrients that form the fat body really provide the fuel for metamorphosis to take place. And actually, during the larval period, for the queen and drone, this is the time when the ovaries and testes develop. The propupa, so once we get to the point 5 days as a larva, the cell is sealed, and the connection between the midgut and the hindgut is opened. And the larva defecates in the cell. It stretches out and becomes a propupa. So there's another molt. And this really provides the external development. Celia Davis describes this quite nicely. She describes it as the external chassis of the car, and then when it's becomes a pupa, they're really building on those points for the internal structures. So the larva has a basic respiratory system that is remodeled in the pupa. The alimentary system completely changes, and everything else sort of is then developed. So these buds that developed as the egg actually start developing sort of in the pupal stage, and then the adult emerges day 21. So the life of a worker bee, after they've emerged from the cell, they're going to be eating lots of pollen, and that pollen is really important because it builds the glandular system. And the age-related behaviour is mainly based on that, really. So to begin with, the bee can start doing cell cleaning. Once they've fed up on lots of pollen, and that starts building the glands, the mandibular gland, the hypopharyngeal gland, then the wax glands. And once the hypopharyngeal gland is developed, then they can start feeding brood. And they're also attending the queen. So it isn't a case of they move from one stage to another. There is quite a lot of overlap in these stages of progression. So they'll be attending a queen for a little while, and then they tend to rotate, so they will move away. when they're attending the queen, they're feeding her, they're cleaning her, they're also antenating her, and then they share food with their nest mates, and then that is spreading the queen's pheromones out from the center of the brood nest. All these jobs, the first sort of starter jobs, are actually carried out so the very young bees really are situated in the center of the brood nest. That's the safest place for them. As they get a bit older, they can do honey processing. The hypopharyngeal gland will atrophy, and then they will start producing the enzymes for honey processing, and they would start doing that work. Their wax glands, which are under the ventral plates of the abdomen, will start producing wax, and they can also do comb building. So that's sort of on the outskirts of the brood nest. And then further from them, there they will do thermoregulation and out at the entrance guard duty. And then they move outside. So as forager bees, once they get to about day 21, they go out, they'll collect nectar or pollen or water or propolis. Some bees will collect nectar and pollen, but they tend to be sort of fairly, they tend to stick mostly to one thing. The key to a lot of this behavior within the hive is, of course, communication. And that is down to pheromones. So pheromone is the scent that invokes a response from one honeybee to another honeybee of the same species. So queen substance is a very important part of that. So the queen has various pheromones, so mandibular gland pheromone, and also her tarsal pheromones and that sort of thing. That all forms queen substance. And as I said, through trophallaxis, sort of that is passed through the colony. That sort of the queen substance also dictates the characteristics of the colony. So when you think about your queen rearing, that is relevant to that. And she were things like temper, honey production, and also sort of health, so hygienic behaviours. It's all down to the queen. Brood pheromone is also very relevant because brood pheromone prevents the worker's ovaries developing, and so if that is removed, there will be nothing preventing laying workers developing, and worker pheromones as well. Trophallaxis shares that throughout the colony. And bee dancers, of course, are used as well. So the waggle dance, as we know, is used to advertise and share food sources and nest sites when they're in swarming situation, and also other dances. So there is the round dance for advertising sites which are closer by, but also dances to activate, so the buzzing runs to activate a swarm to leave the hive. So going on to the hypopharyngeal glands, these are the hypopharyngeal glands. So they are, you can see to either side of the head on the left, those are the big compound eyes. At the top, you can just see one ocelli sort of at the top, and then these big hypopharyngeal glands, which actually I've teased out. On the right-hand side, you can see a picture I've stained the acini, stained the hypopharyngeal gland, and you can see the individual acini on the right. So these develop after emergence, and it's down to the pollen that they take on board. And in young bees, they will produce a clear brood food, and that's a proteinaceous mix for feeding the larvae. And they also feed, they feed the other bees coming in as well. So it isn't just for the brood. In older bees, the hypopharyngeal glands provide enzymes, and this is sucrase and glucose oxidase for breaking down the sugars. Now, the hypopharyngeal glands sort of do this, but there are times when perhaps sort of if a beekeeper has carried out swarm control, a pack dun, for instance, and the queen will be left with the foragers, and so they won't have need of younger bees or bees that can feed brood, and they can revert by eating lots of pollen. So if it was an artificial swarm, then the younger foragers could revert and they could use their hypopharyngeal glands again. And hypopharyngeal glands are also really important in winter bees. In winter bees, they stay much more plump and ready. Those bees aren't feeding brood. And it's really important that the winter bees are healthy, because they need to be able to use that pollen, actually build up the hypopharyngeal glands and the fat body to take the bees through to the spring. One thing that can affect them is nosema. Unfortunately, nosema affects the midgut, the epithelial cells of the midgut, and it deters sort of taking in the protein from the pollen. So, and that then affects the hypopharyngeal glands. And so you get this situation in early spring where you have quite a delicate situation. And if they're affected by nosema, then less of the bees the young bees that are there can actually feed brood. Onto the Nasonov glands. So these always reminds me, when I see the Nasonov gland, of Concord, actually, the nose of Concord tipping down. And it's the last segment that tips down, and the gland is situated underneath that overlap. So it's underneath T6. And it's quite a cocktail, as you can see on the right-hand side. So it's sort of quite a flowery scented cocktail, which provides a location site. So it's used, some examples, so to mark water sites. Water doesn't really give off a scent. To guide returning foragers back to the hive, and also to a swarm. So after the bees have swarmed, and the swarm cluster alights on a branch, then they will be using the Nasonov glands to attract their swarm mates. And also after a disturbance, so you've opened up the hive, and there'll be stragglers coming back, and they will often be using the Nasonov gland at the entrance, and that's probably this example we see here. But if they also use it to attract the queen back from mating site and marking a potential new home. So when the scout bees go out and look at sites, they will mark those. And as well as actually releasing the scent, the bees will usually be fanning. So they'll be fanning to spread the scent out. A caste determination. So as we know, the queen will lay fertilized eggs, so she tends to use her front legs as calipers, measure the cell. If it's a smaller cell, then she tends to lay a fertilized egg to produce a worker. And these are diploid, so 2 sets of 16 chromosomes. And actually a fertilized egg, of course, can become a queen or a worker. So in the first couple of days, either queen or worker are fed sort of royal jelly, and this is a high protein and fat sort of mix. And they're also they're feeding a lot of sugar for if it's a queen, and that queen sugar acts as phagostimulant to stimulate growth, and also it turns on the endocrine system earlier and turns on certain genes for queen like features and turn off workers. From day 2 to 3 onwards, the queen is fed raw jelly in copious amounts, whereas the workers tend to be fed on demand. And this is sort of a mix of fats and increasing crop contents. By the way, the right-hand photo, it is actually a drone, but it was easier to show up. If you look on the right-hand side on the dorsal section, you can just make out the testes, which are fully formed, and you can see the respiratory system through the larval skin. Once the adult queen emerges, she tends to be pretty well ignored by workers. It takes about 3 days really for her mandibular gland to start sort of secreting, and then they will start getting more interested with her, and she will go out for a couple of flights, orientation flights, and then she will start going out on mating flights when she's about 5 days old. So the bees will actually sort of chivvy her out to mating. I hope you can't hear my dog. Once she's been mating, she will have 1,000 to 2,000 eggs per day, and that egg laying is really controlled by food intake. Can you hear him? Good. Okay. All right, and drones from egg to emergence, remember, is 24 days. Honeybees are protandrous, so when it comes to swarm preparation, we will always see drones. Drones are produced before queens. After emergence, it takes about 12 days to sexual maturity. So all the sperm is produced at this point, but actually has to migrate down. The drones only live about 3 months. They're fed by the workers, particularly to begin with, and then I think they feed themselves from honey. After mating, they will die. And of course, drones really, I always think of drones as being something a prosperous hive can support. You know, the colony has to have the resources to be able to keep drones. And if we have a period during the summer where perhaps we have a dearth, we have less forage coming in, then the drones tend to be removed at that point. And it can be a problem when you come to queen mating. Mating takes place in drone congregation areas, and there'll be about 10,000 drones. The drones are attracted by the queen's pheromones, and about an average of 14 to 17 matings takes place. And that actually multiple mating gives lots of patrolines. So I always think of it as lots of barcodes, lots of different features. When he mates, the drone is paralyzed and the mating sign is left in the queen's vagina, and the sperm goes into the queen and is stored in the spermatheca. So she tends to take on about 1 million sperm from each drone, but she stores about 5.5, 6 million sperm in total, and it's a little bit of each from each drone that she will store and use, and that is the spermatheca will store and nourish that for the life of the queen. So sometimes there's problems, isn't there, drone laying queens? And this is usually caused because the queen is unable to fertilize eggs. So it can be an aging queen, It can be a queen who's used up her supply of sperm. She may have been poorly mated. She may be damaged by the beekeeper, or have a physical inability in some ways, or perhaps a genetic fault. I think sometimes during the season, if we've had a period of where there hasn't been such good forage, my experience is that that is the time when we tend to perhaps getting drone laying queens. If there hasn't been such good forage, the queens aren't so well fed, and also in development, but also perhaps they've actually sort of less drones around. So laying workers. So there are always some laying workers in a hive, but they tend to be a tiny percentage, and very few of laying workers' offspring will be in the hive. And it's the queen mandibular for the 9-HTA which inhibits worker ovary development. And also brood pheromone inhibits laying workers. So if we have a situation where we've lost the queen, and then there's a lack of brood pheromones, so after the brood has all emerged, that is when laying workers will develop. And when you do have laying workers, the mandibular glands tend to enlarge, and also the Dufour's gland secretion becomes more queen-like. And that is the problem where sort of, so that you can't just put a queen into a laying worker colony to rectify the situation. And it isn't so easy. The photograph actually shows a laying worker ovary. I can't see the whole of this picture, unfortunately. The bottom, the sting is down through there. I think I'd taken it out, but you can see the string of ovarial, just a couple of ovarials, 2 ovaries in total. So signs we will see, whether it's laying worker or drone laying queen. What you'll see is drone brood laid in worker cells. Once it's developed, you may see stunted drones, so they tend to be smaller drones. If it's well established, you'll have a reducing number of foragers because the drones are there, and much more stunted drones in the hive. If the difference between drone laying queen and laying worker drone laying queen tend to continue laying single eggs at the bottom of the cell, but if she has run out of sperm, she won't know that, and she may be measuring the cell but not being able to fertilize it, so she's actually laying haploid eggs. The queen will produce a more regular pattern of brood, and there'll be more eggs being laid, and of course you may find the queen. Whereas laying workers, you tend to have multiple eggs laid on the side wall of the cell. There'll be a much more irregular pattern, and a smaller quantity of brood actually being laid, and you won't find the queen. So remedies, drone laying queen. If you can do something fairly promptly, so you've got a new queen, sort of that has just been mated but not mated well, or hasn't been able to get out and mate. And you can find her, then requeen, and you can do that by uniting, sort of, or putting a new queen in, or shake it out. You know, if you've got lots of drones in a colony, then you'll probably find that the workers that do remain are getting on the old side, And so it's actually easier, whether it's drone laying queen or laying workers, to just shake them out and let them beg their way into another hive. That's my preferred method. Going on to nutrition. So pollen, as we know, is protein, and this is important for cell building. So uses in the hive are young bees for building up the glands, so that hypopharyngeal gland and the mandibular gland, the wax glands, etc. And others, you know, the sting gland has to work, and others as well. Queen is egg production, so she needs a lot of protein to produce those eggs. It's also fed to the developing larvae, and we will see that. So if you ever done an osema test, you know, very often you will find pollen in the test on the slide. And during the autumn, they use the pollen, so lots and lots of pollen, and that builds up the fat bodies of the winter bees, which is really important. They do store pollen, so they tend to store pollen in small quantities, so you'll always see that arc around the brood nest. And of course, they tend to eat it fairly soon, so it does rotate quite quickly. They use it as they expand the brood nest into that area. Nectar, honey, is the other main part of nutrition, and that provides carbohydrates, so that's their energy supply. And they use it fuel for foraging. It's very important for building the comb once those wax glands are built up, and keeping warm in winter. It tends to be processed into honey as stored for winter, but they do need some water to metabolize the honey. I'll go on to that later. So main sources of forage, and the really important ones. So this is sort of similar to my own area, really. I do have quite a lot of hazel, willow, some willow, not so much apple, pear, plum for my colonies, loads of dandelions and oilseed rape. I tend to have some oilseed rape somewhere. Hawthorn can be a bit fickle. It doesn't always yield. You need a warm spring for that. Field beans, if I'm lucky, and clover. I do get there's a field of clover beside one of my apiaries. Blackberry is a particularly important forage crop, because there are 150 varieties of blackberry, and they tend to be very deep rooted, so they tend to come at quite a gap in forest. If you do get a gap, it tends to be just before the blackberry, so that sort of helps around July time. And then I do have quite a lot of clematis, not a lot of rosebay willow herb, but Michaelmas daisy and lots of ivy sort of around me. So do know sort of your sources of forage, and particularly the earlier and later, the problem areas, really. Sort of be aware of it, but your list will be different to mine. Conversion of nectar into honey. So the foragers bring it back and they offload. So as the foragers load up with nectar from the flower, they carry it, the nectar goes into their honey crop, and at that point enzymes are added. So sucrase is added, and that breaks down the sucrose into glucose and fructose. And also glucose oxidase breaks down the glucose into gluconic acid and hydrogen peroxide. And that starts working on the journey back to the hive. The forager offloads sort of her load to house bees, and then they're working on a physical change really, and that is about reducing the moisture. Nectar has about 30 to 70% moisture, and of course honey is capped at 18 to 20% moisture. So the way they do that is the house bee will extrude a droplet of water onto the tongue. If you've looked closely, the tongues tend to be folded underneath, and they extend the tongue, which produces a very thin film of nectar. And doing this tongue stropping backwards and forwards, they would do it, some people say 80 times, some people say for 20 minutes, but they're doing that and they'll be fanning within the nest to evaporate the moisture. And that, so the initial moisture content is reduced. And then once it gets to a certain point, they will actually paint it over the edges of the cells, and there'll be further fanning to evaporate it. Once it's capped at about 18, it's capped at about 18-20%, and that capping is wax, so it's it will seal the cells. So pollen collection and carrying it back to the colony. So the left-hand picture is the outside of the worker's rear leg. The right-hand picture here is the inside, so it's the same leg. You can actually see on the right-hand one, you can see all the brushes, and the honeybee will okay, so sorry. So the pollen is actually first collected on the plumose hairs. So in the bottom right is a picture of plumose hairs. And the worker bee is, you notice very young bees, they come out, they're very fluffy. If you look under a microscope, they're actually incredibly hairy. And most of it is these plumose. So it's these branched hairs. And they do hold the pollen. The bee will comb the pollen off the head and off the thorax and actually transfer it back to the rear legs. And that's when these brushes of the rear legs, so the brushes on the right-hand side, tend to be brushed one against the other, and then the pollen lands on the rastellum and then is transferred from the inside to the outside. And then this is the corbicular up on the right-hand side in the corner. So, sorry, I didn't know what was doing that. And that, so they're doing that as a sort of close to the flower. They will actually do it in flight. Once they get back to the nest, the forager comes in and she actually just kicks. So she will come to a cell, she'll put her rear legs sort of in the cell, and she will actually kick the loads off. And house bees come in and they will process it. So they will pack it down and they will add honey and enzymes to process it. Other products the bees require are water, and that's transported in the honey crop too, and it's used for thermoregulation. So the bees need to keep the temperature down. They bring it in on demand, really. So if they need, if the temperature goes up, then they will have an increased demand for water. They bring more water in, and they will paint it over cells or paint it over comb, and they will use fanning to evaporate the water and reduce the temperature. And they also use it for dilution of honey. So when they do require to eat honey, they will reduce it to 50% sugar water, and so they require water for that. They tend to use water, a source fairly close to the apiary or nest site, so they don't go very far, and they do mark it with the Nasanov gland. So propolis tends to be collected sort of late summer and autumn when warm. And it's sort of bitten off, so this is little bits of resin really from tree. They collect from trees, and the forager will nibble it off with the mandibles and pass it back and load it into the corbicula. When they get back to the nest, they are unloaded by the house bees. So the house bees will actually nibble it off their legs. They tend to use it immediately, and it can take about an hour to unload a forager. The photograph on the right-hand side was actually a hive at an apiary I looked after, and the entrance block didn't get put in by accident. And this is what I found, and as I recall, it's some years ago, but it was about a week later, and this is what I found. So that it was very late summer, probably September. So that's quite a rate of collection and use. And generally, they tend to use it for varnishing brood cells as they go, smoothing surfaces. I think we often see quite an influx of it late summer, and they're filling in gaps and cracks, sort of, so less than 6 millimetre really, reducing the entrance, so as you see here, and also embalming intruders is another use. It comes in, important factor about propolis is that it has antibacterial qualities, so some people do collect it and produce tinctures and that sort of thing from it. And it really does harden at 5 degrees centigrade, so it really will be quite solid then. So winter bees, so they tend to be produced in the autumn, and they live for 6-7 months. So the winter bees are feeding off lots of pollen, and what tends to happen in the autumn, so as we know, the queen's rate of lay of eggs is reducing, the brood is reducing. So the brood that is produced in the autumn is actually starting to, they're not feeding so much brood, and the protein, the pollen they are feeding on is actually then building up their fat bodies, and because they're not feeding, they have very plump hypopharyngeal glands, and that both of these, the fat body, the vitellogenin, actually synthesizes protein, which helps them produce the protein in spring. So it's really important that our winter bees are healthy, because of course Varroa feed off the fat body, so if they're not up to par, they won't be able to be as efficient. And these are really old young bees, you know, sort of, they're not feeding brood, they're not flying as much as summer bees, and that's what enables them to live so much longer. The colony population, so this varies, and we probably all know this, this graph. So this is the adult bees, and early in the spring, the winter cluster. Sorry, the winter cluster is a reduced level. And some of the older bees are dying off as the brood nest increases, and it takes a little while. So we've got this transition period from the old winter bees to the younger bees that are being produced. And I believe after the winter solstice, the queen is just starting to lay. and she will start laying quite small quantities. That will build up very gradually, because of course they have to keep the brood nest warm for the brood. So it's quite a demand. They can't support too much brood too early in the year. And we have this very delicate period around April time, when sometimes the brood population can exceed the adults, and it's also a time when forage can be quite sparse, or the opportunity to go out and forage. So we can have very bad weather, which can prevent them from foraging. So all these things, the seasonality as well, we've seen probably a shift in this graph this year, sort of backwards, where the forage seems to be about 3 weeks earlier in my area. Swarming is also a factor, because of course if the colony swarms, then the brood, the adults is going to vary as well. Towards the end of the year, the number of brood and adults reduces, because the colony can only support so many. It's much easier. It's good to go through the winter with a reasonable population of bees, but you don't want to have too much for the winter stores to support. So the winter cluster, so about 18 degrees C, the bees will sort of start clustering. So you may have seen this. You may get small clusters of bees. By about 14 degrees, that will form one cluster. And that by about 14 degrees, you will have one cluster with an outer mantle. So that will be several layers of bees. And inside that mantle, the core can actually move around a little bit. And as the temperature increases, the cluster will expand, and as it decreases, the cluster actually contracts, and that is part of their management of heat. They can also generate heat, so they sort of disconnect and use, if you've ever looked inside the thorax, there's these the two big pairs of sort of flight muscles, and they generate some heat. When there is no brood, the center of the cluster, they will keep it to 20 degrees centigrade, and if there's brood present, about 34-35 degrees. The outer layer tends to be about 7 degrees, sort of in the depths of winter. And the bees, if they get too cold, if they get below 7 degrees, they're going to fall off the cluster. So they tend to move in a little bit like penguins. And the cluster tends to gradually move up over winter. And they can't move very far, because of course if there is any brood, they're going to stay with the brood and with the queen. Sorry, this is a very quick one I added. So robbing, so just be aware, robbing can be carried out by bees, by other bees. Colonies in the same apiary in particular, and also wasps. I think wasps have been quite a problem this year. Precautions you can take is ensure the hive is secure. I lost a colony last summer, and I realised too late that I had omitted to put the mesh in the roof, and wasps have got in. Once wasps in particular have got in, or bees actually, into a colony, then it's very difficult to reverse the situation unless you can actually move the colony. But other precautions you can take are take care during inspections. So I like to put supers, particularly when it gets to July, August, September. I tend to put the supers completely in the upturned roof, so not on the diagonal. I put them right inside, and I always put the crown board on top. and avoid opening for long periods. Something I saw a few years ago was a hive inspection, a demonstration, and the hive was left open for so long it ended up being robbed by other bees. When you're feeding, if you feed all the hives at the same time and feed in the evening, because if you feed in the evening, there isn't the excitement, they're not advertising, and it's just safer to prevent robbing starting in the first place, and I think that's important. Avoid spills when you are feeding, and reduce the entrance. As soon as I see first wasps, I tend to reduce the entrance. I always keep my entrance block in, but I will reduce the entrance by half. If the wasps are still there, I'll reduce it. And most of mine ended up just a 1 to 2 bee spaces. And that helps the colony to defend themselves and prevent a problem. So once wasps have got into a hive, then they tend to know the way out. I know there are other tunnels and that sort of thing, but they're going to, I haven't used them myself, but they're going to be most effective if they are implemented before there's a problem. Okay, thank you. Any questions?
There are some in the chat, Christine.
Good, I think.
Let me get to the top. This one's from Greg, from Fareham. Thank you, he says.
Hi,
you
Greg.
mentioned sucrase as an enzyme for breaking down sucrose. I assume, do they not also produce invertase for this purpose?
Invertase is sucrase. I think they changed it. They sort of, it's the same thing.
Right.
The name was changed a few years ago. I think it was sort of changed around the time I did module 2 some years ago.
I think in one of the Celia books, the edition I've got, it's in brackets, the older name.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yes. And glucose oxidase, wasn't that? No, that had a different name, amylase. I think there are different names. American sort of the Americans use different names as well. I won't quote them though, because I can't remember.
And Gordon asks, when a virgin queen goes out on her mating flight, how does she know where the drone congregation area is located? Does she have a scout retinue that show her the way?
I don't think that has ever been proved, and I don't think that is the case. But I think it's something which perhaps needs, I don't think that's something we really know. I think all I can give is my personal opinion, and it's how do drones find the drone congregation areas, because they're the same place every year. And I believe it's a combination of landscape features and maybe the slope and the prevailing wind and things like that that add up to sort of always going in the same direction. But I'm guessing that's just my own guess, I'm afraid. I don't think we know.
Thank you. There's a follow-on to that. Her own drones go to the nearest drone congregation area, so she must choose another one. How does she know to not go to the same one?
Drones tend to fly a shorter distance than queens do. So actually that helps prevent inbreeding.
And then Alan asks, if the apiary is isolated, how far away can the DCA be?
I can't remember. They are very often, I think the closest is about 100, 120 meters. I think there are quite a few drone congregation areas around, but it's not something, we know of a few drone congregation areas, but they've never been mapped to know. I believe drones do visit usually visit more than one, or often visit more than one drone congregation area. So they may, I don't think they actually go to just one area in their lifetime. I believe they do visit. And sometimes it's thought, and it is thought that they actually come back and they may rest up in hives that are not their home hive or nest.
Thank you. And Martin asks, you said you like to shake out your bees. I think that was for one of the
Laying
brood
workers from
issues.
laying queens.
Do you do that on top of other colonies?
It depends on the situation. It depends on the situation. I mean, obviously, if I had several small nukes, I wouldn't want them overwhelmed. So I may shake them out closer to a bigger colony. But I tend to shake them out, say on a sheet, something like that, just so I can, I don't know, so I can sort of see what's happening really and just control it. But yeah, it varies, to be honest with you. So, you know, if I've got a particular colony I would prefer them to go in, then I will shake them out closer to that colony.
And Brian's asked quite an interesting question there. Can drones from laying workers mate with queens? Are they of any use?
Well, they are the genetic material. They are the last ditch, you know, the last stand for the colony. They are viable. Yes, they are viable. But I think compared to fully developed drones, they probably don't have much hope in succeeding. But I think it is possible. Yes, they do have the potential. So, you know, sort of, I've never dissected. Actually, that's a good point. I've never dissected a stunted drone. So that could be worth looking at, seeing how well equipped they are compared to a standard drone. But I would think, yes, they do have the possibility of, they can do, but it's probably unlikely because they're not as strong. They don't have the bigger thorax, you know, so they can't fly as fast as a fully developed drone. But I think they would have everything else.
Thank you. And Neil asks, for the actual assessment, is it best to prepare a seasonal list of forage sources for your assessors, or should we just memorise?
I think, well, it's good to have this. It's good to have a record of it anyway, isn't it? You know, sort of because it's good. I mean, I often, so if it, I do worry about forage. I'm in a very rural area, whereas I know if you're in an urban situation, there's so much more variability. So once I see the horse chestnut finishing flowering, I know I've got the possibility that there could be a bit of a gap in forage. And I know the forage around my area, and it's worth making a note of it. I think for the assessment, just make sure that you know what is in your area, and you know what, particularly, you know, what is out at the moment, and what you may have to rely on for the autumn and also the early spring when you've got that delicate, you know, what is available. Some people, I never feed my bees pollen, but I know I've got good pollen sources around my apiary, and I've watched those coming in. So it's being aware of those. It's your choice, really. I would write them down and make a note of them for myself.
Thank you. And Mohammed asks, why do the workers not attempt to supersede when we have a case of drone laying queens? They do for every other queen weakness.
Well, a drone laying queen isn't, they sort of do try, don't they? Because sometimes they will try and raise a queen cell, but actually it's not viable. And you see these really long, almost like a drone, I think, that's drawn out. But if it was a queen that was failing, so perhaps she was starting to misfire, then they will then they would try to supersede her. But if she's a drone laying queen and she hasn't been mated, she hasn't got the sperm, so there isn't the fertilized eggs, so they wouldn't be able to supersede.
Right, thank you. I think that's all the questions. There's no one put a hand up to ask any more. Just wait a second to see if anyone will. No, no more questions. So thank you so much, Christine. That was really excellent.
You're
Got some
welcome.
really useful things for the assessment there for people to make a bit clearer in their mind.
I think the forage, do keep that in consideration when you're building up your colonies for the assessment and preparing the colonies for your assessment. So for assessment years, you really want those colonies to be in, you need them honey producing. So you need to keep that queen laying, you need to keep them, you've got to think about your timetable, etc. And if you do have a dearth in forage, make sure you are feeding the bees if you need to keep them going. So that is one area where forage does come in, as well as general questions that you may be asked. And also from a point of view, it's good to monitor, I'm sorry, I'm going off piste a bit, but good to monitor what is coming into the colony as well. So, look for the pollen colours coming in. If you don't know what they are, it doesn't necessarily matter, but sort of, try and see, and, are you seeing more than, say 2-3 different pollen colours going in? Are you seeing nectar actually coming into the hive, into around the nest, etc.? Because if they could have honey stores, but if they're not bringing in nectar, they're going to reduce the queen's rate of lay. So, that is where you might just need to feed a little to keep her going. Anyway, that was just something I thought I'd add.
Yes, thank you. That's some really good advice. It's just struck me as you were talking that if you drew a radius on a simple map of your area, you could probably mark on all the trees you knew about. I know where the local horse chestnut is.
Yes.
And then you'd be able to know where that forage was. And that's just a bit aside from just knowing a list of names, isn't it?
Yes, because then you know what is still to come out, what is still flowering. It's just because so it's like ivy, sort of some ivy here has gone over. It did start flowering very earlier, but the southern side, the more northerly side tends to flower much later, and you get these kind of situations, don't you? Get to know the forage in your area.
Yeah, right, brilliant. Thanks so much. There's been some really good comments saying thank you in the chat as well. So thank you very much tonight.
Good, you're welcome. And good luck, everyone.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine.
Thank you. Hi, Richard.
Hi. That was jolly good. I know
I think that's a
Christine
tough
was part
session.
of